The letter arrived on a windless afternoon, folded in thick parchment and sealed with black wax. Its presence alone changed the air of Julian Harrow's modest London studio, where the scent of turpentine and unfinished canvases lingered like ghosts of ambition. He had not expected correspondence, certainly not from a solicitor, and when he broke the seal, the first words sent a tremor through him. To Mr. Julian Harrow, heir and sole beneficiary of the late Alaric Harrow, master of Thornhollow Manor, Somerset. Julian read the line twice, before setting it down, his pulse quickening. His uncle Alaric, the famed portraitist, the recluse, the man whispered about in London salons, was dead. He stared at the signature, Thomas Pell, Esquire, Solicitor of Wessex. Beneath it lay the simple invitation to attend the reading of the will at Thornhollow Manor within the fortnight, and to claim the property henceforth his by blood and right. For a long moment, Julian stood motionless, the city's distant clamor pressing faintly against the windows. Then, with a half-breath that was almost laughter, he whispered, "So the old master remembered me after all." He had not seen Alaric Harrow in 10 years. As a boy, Julian had spent a single summer at Thornhollow, a strange and haunting place built high on the cliffs above the River Avon, its walls hung with portraits whose eyes seemed to breathe. His uncle had been a commanding figure, tall, austere, his hands perpetually stained with pigment, his voice both gentle and terrible. He had painted with a ferocity that frightened the servants and fascinated the boy. Art, Alaric had once told him, is not imitation, it is resurrection. The true artist does not capture life, he gives it. Julian had never forgotten those words. He had studied painting in London, struggling to make a name of his own, but success had always eluded him. Now, fate, or inheritance, was calling him back to the place where his fascination with art had begun. Within a week, he was on the road to Somerset. The journey south was long and gray. The autumn fields lay barren under a low sky. Crows wheeled over hedgerows stripped of leaves. By dusk, the carriage left the main road, turning onto a narrow lane that wound through a forest of ash and yew. The trees grew denser, their limbs intertwined like clasped hands, shutting out what little light remained. At last, through the rising mist, Julian saw the towers of Thornhollow Manor. It stood upon the cliff's edge, its stone walls black with age, its windows blind and unlit. Even from a distance, it seemed less built than grown from the rock beneath it, a living thing of stone and shadow. The driver crossed himself when the first gate came into view. "You'll not find much company here, sir," he muttered. "The place has been empty since the master's passing. Folk say it's not. Right?" Julian raised an eyebrow. "Not right. They say he painted till the end, even when his hands were shaking. They say he died with a brush in his grip, and his last picture still wet." "Nay," Julian smiled faintly. "Then he died a true artist." The driver made no reply. A servant met him at the great door. A stooped man in black livery, his face lined like cracked parchment. "Mr. Harrow, sir, welcome home." "Home," Julian repeated softly. The word felt strange on his tongue. Inside, the air was cool and still, smelling faintly of oil paint and lavender. The entrance hall was vast, lit only by a single lamp. Portraits lined the walls, faces pale against dark backgrounds, rendered with exquisite precision. Each pair of painted eyes seemed to turn toward him as he passed. "Your uncle's effects are as he left them," the servant murmured. "No one's had cause to enter the studio since the day." He hesitated. "The day he died, Julian finished for him." "Yes, sir. And the painting." The old man's gaze flicked upward toward the attic stair. "Best not disturb it at night, sir. The light's strange after sundown." Julian's curiosity flared, but fatigue weighed heavier. "Very well, tomorrow." He was shown to a room overlooking the cliff. Beyond the window, the sea murmured faintly far below, and mist pressed against the glass like a living veil. In the corridor, a clock chimed once, low, resonant, funereal. When he closed his eyes, he dreamt of faces, hundreds of them, rising from the darkness, their eyes wide and hollow, whispering in the voice of his uncle. Art is resurrection. Morning brought rain, soft, relentless, and gray. Thornhollow seemed half asleep beneath it. Julian ate alone in the dining hall, his reflection wavering in the tarnished mirrors that lined the wall. Then, armed with a lantern, he ascended the narrow staircase to the upper floor, to his uncle's studio. Dust veiled everything. The air was thick with the scent of varnish and decay. Canvases stood stacked against the walls, half-finished works, faces emerging from shadow, hands ghostly pale against darkness. The room itself seemed alive, as though it had been waiting. In the far corner, covered by a heavy cloth, stood a single tall easel. Julian crossed the room slowly, heart hammering. The fabric was stiff with dust. When he pulled it away, a plume of gray rose like breath, and the painting was revealed. A woman, or rather the suggestion of one. Her face almost complete, her form lost in shadow. The light upon her skin was uncanny, almost luminous, as though she were lit from within. Her eyes, unfinished yet piercing, drew him in. Even in their incompleteness, they seemed to look directly at him, seeing him, recognizing him. Beneath the easel lay a palette, dried pigments in shades of crimson and ochre, and a single brush, its bristles stiff, the handle still smeared with black paint. Julian whispered, "So, this was your final work, Uncle." He lifted the lantern higher. In the dim light, the woman's lips seemed almost to move. That night he sat before the portrait again, studying it by candlelight. He could not explain the compulsion, only that something within the painting demanded his gaze. The eyes haunted him. They were incomplete, mere shadows, yet more alive than any he had ever painted himself. He felt the echo of another presence there, not his uncle's, but something deeper. When he turned away, he fancied he saw the faintest movement, the brush, fallen across the palette, trembling as if touched by an unseen hand. He laughed softly to himself. It's the draft, nothing more. But when he looked again, a single new stroke of paint, thin, precise, gleamed wetly across the canvas where none had been before. He stared. The air seemed to grow colder. From somewhere beyond the walls, the sound of the sea rose suddenly, louder than before, though the window was closed. And in the half-dark, The unfinished eyes seemed to deepen, not merely to reflect the candlelight, but to contain it. When the candle guttered out, Julian found himself whispering into the silence. "Who are you?" No answer came. Only the faint creak of the easel, the long sigh of wind through unseen crack. He turned to leave. Yet, as he reached the door, a soft sound made him freeze, a whisper, so faint it might have been imagined. "Julian." He spun around. The room was empty. The painting stared back, unchanging. And yet, for the first time, he was certain. The eyes were not the same as before. The next morning broke pale and colorless, as if the world itself had been washed of pigment. Thornallow Manor seemed caught between sleep and waking. The rain had ceased, but mist clung to the stones like breath upon a mirror. Julian descended late to breakfast, though he found himself unable to eat. His thoughts were already above, in the attic, where the woman with the hollow eyes awaited. He had dreamed of her, or perhaps only of the painting. In the dream, her voice had whispered words he could not remember, and her hand, pale and weightless, had brushed against his cheek. When he woke, he found his skin cold, where she had touched him. By the time he climbed the narrow stair to the studio, the mist had thickened to a silvery haze. The door creaked open, and the smell of linseed oil greeted him like something still alive. The portrait was as he had left it, yet not the same. The faint line of paint that had appeared the previous night had dried perfectly, blending with his uncle's brushwork as though it had always been there. Julian stared, heart quickening. A trick of memory, he told himself, or perhaps a flaw in perception. Still, the perfection of the stroke disturbed him. He knew his uncle's hand, firm, elegant, disciplined, and this line was precisely that. Kneeling, he found a chest beneath the easel. Inside lay jars of pigment, brushes wrapped in linen, and a small portfolio of sketches. They were studies of the same woman, her profile, her hands, her gaze. In each drawing, her eyes were slightly different, sorrowful, then serene, then almost mocking. One page bore a single note in his uncle's handwriting. To finish her is to free her or lose oneself. Julian traced the words with a trembling finger. Alaric had always spoken in riddles, but this was something else. Was it confession? Warning? Warning. He closed the sketchbook and stood before the portrait once more. "I shall finish you," he murmured, "and prove you innocent of madness." For the next several days, Julian labored in the studio from dawn until the light failed. He began cautiously, cleaning the varnish, mending the cracked surface. The more he worked, the more he felt the painting respond beneath his hand, as though the canvas itself breathed. He told himself this was simply his imagination. Yet the illusion was so perfect, it thrilled him. At times, he spoke aloud, as though to a companion. "Your eyes are nearly whole now," he said once, mixing a shade of gray-green. "What color were they, do you think? Seawater? Smoke?" In the flicker of the lamp, the eyes seemed to glisten, as though the question had reached them. He laughed nervously. "Ah, but you won't answer, will you?" The silence was almost expectant. He remembered then the tales the villagers had muttered to the driver. The Harrow curse. that every painter in the family was doomed to lose what he loved most. His grandfather had gone blind. His great-uncle had burned all his own canvases before vanishing into the moors. And Alaric, his brilliant, haunted uncle, had died alone before this very portrait. Superstition, Julian told himself. Yet when he looked again at the painted woman, he felt a tremor of doubt. On the fifth evening, the weather changed. The sea below the cliffs roared with sudden violence, and thunder rolled like footsteps across the sky. Julian, intent on his work, hardly noticed the storm. He was painting her eyes, the task that had consumed his uncle's final days. The light in them defied him. It was not merely reflection, but consciousness. Each time he touched the brush to the canvas, he felt resistance, as though painting not upon cloth, but flesh. The shadows deepened of their own accord, forming a depth he could not control. His heart raced. His breath shortened. He painted faster, driven by an energy that was not entirely his own. The storm reached its height. Lightning flashed through the skylight, illuminating the room in sharp blue-white bursts. In that brief glare, he saw the portrait move. The woman's eyes flicked upward, directly into his. He stumbled backward, the brush falling from his hand. The next flash revealed the painting still, no movement, no change. Only the illusion of light. But the illusion was too perfect. He was sweating, trembling. "Enough," he whispered. "I'm overtired." He turned to leave, but something stopped him, a faint sound, so small it might have been the wind or the sea. Wah! A sigh. He froze. The hair at his neck prickled. Slowly, against reason, he turned back. Her lips, the painted lips, were parted slightly, and upon them rested the ghost of a smile. The next morning, Julian woke in his chair. He had fallen asleep in the studio, the candle long burned out. His head throbbed. The storm had passed, leaving the air heavy with salt and rain. He rose unsteadily, then stopped. The portrait had changed. He was certain of it. The eyes, once half complete, were finished now, the irises gleaming with a deep, impossible color, gray threaded with silver. They were his uncle's eyes. He felt it instantly, that same penetrating gaze he remembered from childhood, capable of stripping truth from lies. "Who are you?" he whispered again, as he had that first night. No answer, only the faint ticking of rain against the glass. He turned to his work table. The palette was smeared with fresh paint, yet he had not lifted a brush since the previous evening. The thought chilled him. Had he worked in his sleep? The memory was blank. He could not recall the final strokes, nor when exhaustion had claimed him. But the results were undeniable, and when he looked once more, he saw that the woman in the portrait now seemed almost to breathe. Her chest rose ever so slightly, a rhythm in the corner of vision, gone when stared at directly. That afternoon, Mr. Pell, the solicitor, arrived unexpectedly to inspect the estate's inventory. He found Julian pale and distracted, the smell of turpentine heavy in the air. "You've been working, I see," said the lawyer, glancing at the painting. "Ah, that must be the last of Alaris's works. Remarkable likeness." Julian frowned. You recognize her? The man hesitated. Why, yes. She was said to be your uncle's muse, or perhaps his model. A Miss Clara Vale, if I recall, vanished some 20 years ago. Vanished? Indeed. Rumor said she was last seen here at Thornhollow. But gossip dies quickly, Mr. Harrow. I'm sure it was nothing. Julian's gaze returned to the portrait. She doesn't look like gossip. When he looked again toward the solicitor, the man had turned away, unwilling to meet the painted eyes. That night, sleep refused him. He wandered the halls, candle in hand. The manor creaked with the wind. Every shadow seemed to lean closer. When he passed the long gallery, he noticed something strange. Each portrait, every ancestor's painted face, had paled, as though color were draining from the canvas itself. Only the woman in the attic seemed untouched, more vivid than ever. He returned to her near midnight. The moon shone through the skylight, washing her in a cold brilliance. Her expression had softened. She looked almost alive, almost tender. The illusion stirred both awe and dread in him. I see you now, he murmured. But do you see me? The silence pressed back, thick as breath. Then, faintly, so faintly he thought he imagined it, came an answer. Always. Die. Julian staggered backward, candle shaking. Who spoke? The light flickered. A gust of air swept through the room, though the windows were shut. When he turned toward the sound, the candle died. In the darkness that followed, he felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched, not by a presence in the room, but through it. The weight of a gaze that came from nowhere and everywhere. And as lightning flared once more through the skylight, the painted woman's eyes shone with terrible vitality. He fled then, down the corridor, through the long hall of portraits. But even there, the faces seemed to follow. His ancestors' eyes hollow and dim, as though the life within them had been taken, drawn elsewhere. In his room, he locked the door and sank to the floor. He could still see her eyes in his mind, gray as the storm, patient, knowing. The whisper came again, as gentle as a lover's breath. Finish me! He pressed his hands to his ears. But the voice was not in the air. It was in him. He thought of a lyric's note. To finish her is to free her, or lose oneself. And in that instant, Julian understood the beginning of madness. For 3 days, Julian Harrow did not leave the studio. He slept there when sleep would come. He ate almost nothing. The servants, uncertain of his moods, left trays at the threshold and withdrew without knocking. The manor itself seemed to sink into silence, as if holding its breath. He told himself he was finishing the painting, that he was working to honor his uncle's legacy. But the truth, though he scarcely dared to name it, was that the painting was finishing him. Every hour he spent before the easel hollowed him further. His face, once bright with the fever of creation, had grown gaunt, his eyes shadowed by sleeplessness. Yet there was a light in them now, sharp and unnatural, the reflection of what he beheld daily. The woman in the canvas, her beauty no longer comforted him. It demanded. He would stand for hours, brush in hand, unable to move, staring into those gray-silver eyes that seemed to expand until they filled the room. The longer he looked, the more they changed, subtly, imperceptibly, but enough to make him doubt the evidence of his own sight. At times, they were sorrowful, at others, mocking. Sometimes they looked not at him, but through him. He began to speak to her. At first, softly, as one speaks to oneself, then aloud, as to a confidante. He told her of his loneliness, of his failures, of his uncle's shadow that had always loomed over his work. The painting listened. And once, just once, he thought it answered. You are not like him, it whispered, almost kindly. You will finish what he could not. At moments of clarity, Julian tried to reason with himself. He told himself it was exhaustion, or the echo of his own voice. But even in those moments, his conviction faltered. He found himself doing things he did not remember beginning, mixing pigments, cleaning brushes, adjusting the lighting. He would awaken from a trance to find fresh strokes of color on the canvas, perfect in placement and tone, though he had no memory of painting them. The eyes grew more lifelike each day. Sometimes, when he caught them from the corner of his vision, they seemed to blink. He began covering the mirrors in the studio, unable to bear his own reflection. For in the few glimpses he caught, his image looked faint, as though the glass were losing him by degrees. His skin seemed gray, his pupils wide and pale. Once, as he bent over a basin of water, he saw her face, not his, ripple up at him, and he recoiled so violently that the basin shattered. It was during one such fevered day that he discovered a hidden drawer in his uncle's desk. Inside were letters, unopened, unsent, addressed to Clara Vale. The handwriting trembled, the ink fading to brown. Julian read them greedily, searching for meaning, for explanation. Clara, my muse, my ruin, you have stolen the light from my hands, and I cannot paint another without seeing you in the darkness between the brushstroke. If I complete you, I shall unmake myself. Julian's hand shook. He read the final, unfinished note, dated the week before Alaric's death. You are not gone, my love. You are waiting in the paint. You will live if I can only. The line ended there. Beneath it, smeared like the echo of a fingerprint, was a small crescent of blood. Julian folded the letters carefully and pressed them to his chest. You loved her, he whispered, and she devoured you. Then, in a voice that was not entirely his own, but you were not strong enough. I am. The following nights blurred into one another. He ceased to sleep. The Manor's silence grew suffocating, filled only by the sea's distant pulse and the faint scratch of bristles on canvas. He painted without seeing, without choosing. The woman's face was complete now, her expression tender and terrible all at once. But her hands were still unfinished, the same unfinished hands that had stilled his uncle's brush forever. When he closed his eyes, he saw her waiting, patient as the tide. When he opened them, he found her in the dark corners of the room, in the gleam of the doorknob, in the glass of the window, always watching, always near. He began to dream while awake. Once, he thought she stepped down from the easel, her bare feet silent upon the wooden floor. She stood before him, her hair the color of tarnished silver, her gaze heavy with pity. Julian, she said. "You see me as I am, but to free me, you must take my place." He reached toward her and awoke on the floor, his hand bleeding, the edge of the palette knife buried in the wood beside him. By the 10th day, his reason had begun to splinter. He wrote letters to London that he never sent. In one, he begged a friend to come and witness a miracle of art.d. In another, he confessed he had found the border between the living and the painted. By the third, his handwriting dissolved into illegible spirals. He burned them all. He now spoke to no one but the portrait. Sometimes he heard other voices answering, from the house, from the walls, from within his own skull. At night, he would sit by the dying fire and hear footsteps pacing in the corridor above, though no servant dared enter that floor. Once, during a fevered dawn, he looked upon his unfinished reflection in the window and saw her standing behind him, smiling faintly, her eyes bright with triumph. "You have nearly finished," she said, "and then you will understand." He turned, but she was gone. Only the empty room and the whisper of the sea. The following evening, he made a discovery that shattered what little remained of his reason. He found his uncle's death mask. It was kept in a velvet-lined box beneath the worktable. Thin plaster, yellowed with age, bearing the faint impression of Alaric Harrow's face. But there was something wrong about it. The eyes, where they should have been hollow, had been filled with pigment. Gray, silver pigment, data white. The same shade as the eyes on the portrait. Julian dropped the mask. It shattered against the floor, and a faint powder rose like ash. He staggered backward, breath ragged. The truth was a knife he could not avoid. His uncle's eyes, the eyes that had so haunted his youth, had not died with him. They had been transferred, captured, immortalized in the canvas. And now they looked out from a woman's face. From that hour, Julian ceased to paint with his hands. Something else painted through him. He felt the brush lift, move, hesitate, stroke, without his command. The scent of oil and metal filled the air. The rhythm was both exquisite and terrible, like music played by an unseen hand. He wept as he worked, unable to stop. The woman's hands emerged from shadow, pale as ivory, graceful, almost tender. When the final curve of her fingers met the light, the entire canvas seemed to pulse once, like a living thing drawing breath.